Right, welcome back, guys, to another episode of Gym Goss. You're here with myself, Jacob Skeppis, Samuel Skeppis, Jackson Pearson. Today on the show, we have Bridgette Godfrey. Welcome, Bridgette.
For having me. It's an honor to be here.
And Bridgette has had a little bit of a taste for what she's in for in the pre-show discussion. So she knows that things are a little bit off the cuff here, and we don't always keep it above the table. Jackson's laughing. But we'll get stuck into things. We'll get to the important stuff first. So, Bridgette, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background in the fitness industry, and I guess things you've done coaching wise and as an athlete.
Yeah. So I actually started off as a middle distance runner. That's sort of like my background in high school, and touch football as well. They were like my two little things that I had going. I moved to the Gold Coast 4 years ago. I'd never stepped foot in a gym. I was like the runner, always running. And it was raining one day, so I actually went to a gym to run on the treadmill. And I met an IFBB pro there, and that's actually when I started to lift weights. I was like, what are all these people doing? There's all this crazy stuff going on downstairs. It's like the bird's eye view, and I could see all the machines and stuff. And he actually came up to me and he was like, hey, do you do you lift weights? You look like you're just a cardio bunny. And I was like, no, I don't, but I'm actually really intrigued by the situation. It was a bit of a bodybuilding gym, so there was a lot going on. And yeah, the rest is history. I sort of just I got into gym then, started lifting weights. And I guess having that competitive nature, I sort of got into competing quite quickly. And I actually started my first prep for my very first show. I was very small on stage, sort of the next week, I think it was.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's a very, very interesting way for somebody, especially a female, to get into the gym, is to just one day walk in, meet an IFBB pro and start shifting the tin. That's wouldn't be the conventional way for people to get into the gym. That's quite an interesting story. And I guess when you were running, were you competitive as a runner? Like, what level did you compete at? What event did you run in?
So 800 and 1500. So I represented Queensland a few times. I got picked to run for Australia, but I didn't end up going. I had an injury. But I was pretty full on into it in high school. So yes, those were the days when I could run. I don't run anymore. I don't think I could even run a K, to be honest.
Jackson's only really efficient or effective at running to the fridge these days. I've seen him try to run down the beach, and he looks like he's waddling down the boardwalk there in Perth.
I've got 10 seconds in me, and that's it.
Yeah. Well,
are we still talking about running?
I was waiting for that.
It's like,
honestly, I couldn't think of anything worse these days. I'm like,
than running or a 10-second bout with Jackson. Sorry, guys. I'll mute myself.
All right.
You're on fire today once.
It's too easy.
It's the extra food, isn't it? It's the extra
that's
food.
right. It's like a little bit of caffeine and some extra carbs will fucking do wonders for you. Try not to swear.
So, I guess that's the start of the story. And then, I got into my first prep for my very first show. I had nothing. I had no idea what to expect, to be honest. I'd only just started training, only just started lifting weights. I guess I was lucky in that respect to be able to learn from someone so advanced like that straight away, and not only online but in person as well. So I used to do sessions with him in person. So I did my first show, had no idea what to expect. I thought I looked awesome. I was like, oh my God, this is the leanest I've ever been, skinny type thing. And then I got up on stage and I was like, wow, these girls have muscle. Like, this is insane. They've got shape, they've got glutes, they've got quads, oh my God, it was like a huge eye opener for me. And that's when I sort of was like, wow, I've got so much work to do. Went back, train, obviously only into my second year of training. And then came back the next year, did much better, came second actually, which is awesome, I guess, because my training experience wasn't great, huge. And then again, so my third show just happened in April where I got my pro card. So.
And was your second season or second show when you competed and came second, was that in the WBFF as well?
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. That's a fair effort. Your second show to come second in the WBFF.
I guess after that first show, I was so determined. You know, it was my life. It was just absolutely, it was like that moment where I was like, this is everything I want. Like it was just, yeah, balls to walls. I just went all in. So, yeah.
Have you found now after competing, getting a pro card and sort of reaching, I guess, the peak of what in your eyes, I'm sure was like the pinnacle of your athletic success in the WFF, have you found that your drive and determination to make it your life is no longer the same? Is it the same? Are you still as determined to be, the best fitness model you can be, or are you much more focused on prioritizing life and getting that, quote unquote, I know Jackson hates this, which is why I'm opening this one up for discussion, that work-life balance, so to speak, between, the training and, having a social life and living, doing all the things you want to do?
Yeah, definitely. I think in recent days, I've sort of taken a step back in, I guess, how much time and effort I was putting into personal development in the way of competing. And I've sort of lent more into, I guess, business. I mean, I still have huge competing goals, but I think, I've incorporated other things as well now, which is nice. I think that just comes with age as well, maybe a bit of maturity. At the start, I was like, this is all I care about. Honestly, it was all I cared about. Competing was my life at the start. Whereas now it's sort of, I guess, opened up different avenues that I want to prioritize as well.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, so I guess with a little bit about you, Bridgette, and obviously you would have had to learn how to train really hard to build an appreciable amount of muscle in the short time frame that you had between your seasons. How do you do that? And I guess one thing that I think we all know is important to training to build muscle is intensity. And what is intensity for muscle growth? I think a lot of people who might not be as familiar with the podcast as others wouldn't really know what we mean by intensity. They might think it's just weight on the bar, those kind of things. But what is intensity for muscle hypertrophy and why is it important? Bridgette, and then we'll pass it on to Jackson.
Yeah. So I guess intensity isn't absolutely everything when it comes to training. And I think it's one of those things that a lot of people don't really understand the concept of relative to weight training, So a lot of the times when I've said, you need to pick up your intensity, you need to train harder, I've had people misinterpret that thinking, that means going with burpees in between your sets or shorten your rest periods, make sure at the end of your session, you're absolutely just dead. I think a lot of people, when they hear the word intensity, it's like that might be, especially if you're new to training, that's the first thing that comes to mind, possibly for a lot of people. Well, in my experience anyway, that's what I've found. But, the importance of intensity, I guess, knowing how to push, I mean, it's so important. And especially when building muscle is the goal. And I think that, although there might be phases in your training where you don't have to push as hard, you might be going through more of a volume focused phase where intensity doesn't have to be, at an all-time high. If you don't have the ability to push the limits, that's a problem. I think that's where the problem lies, is not knowing how to push or never having been pushed, to most of your capabilities is yeah.
I would echo that. Sam, what do you have to say on that?
I just think that kind of the concept of knowing how to push and knowing how to to be pushed, I guess, as well, is something that often comes up when we do talk about intensity. Like really, obviously intensity, we need to define what it is, but just generally the concept of it, training hard. It's like Bridgette's background as a elite runner. Like you have to be able to push yourself to advance and to be an elite runner. So it's always, very telling that we kind of get people on podcasts and we're chatting with them, and these people have made it to say a more advanced level in their training, or they've made it further on in terms of their athletic kind of endeavors, or they're successful. And it's kind of like this recurring trait that everyone shows, is that they have excelled in one other domain prior to and in their development. And it's like that capacity to train hard is something that's born over time and in the early stages of their development. Then you get into the gym, it's like we're just like running on a treadmill, and she's like, yeah, sweet, okay, now I'm going to lift weights. But it's like her idea of hard training has already been very much born on, and it will be predicated by what was hard when she was running, you know, like that kind of sensation, and being able to like translate that now into the gym is really telling.
I think for sure that helps, I guess, your prior experiences. Something that I've noticed as well, it's like you guys probably too, working with so many different people, it's almost like it's in your blood. You know, you can really push. Some people can just really push. It comes naturally to them. And then other people, I guess, need to work a little bit harder to find that point. And I think that's when, you know, things like your training environment really matters. I thought I trained hard, as in the way of running and things like that. I thought I could really push. It wasn't until I did a few sessions with, I don't know if you know him, Sam Pierce. That was the IFBB pro. He's an Australian bodybuilder. It wasn't until I did sessions with him continuously that, you know, I would get to a point of where I think, you know, I'm only a few reps off failure here. I'm at failure here. And he would, you know, prove to me, I guess, that I still had 15 left in the tank, you know. So it wasn't until I experienced that sort of training in person that I found a whole new level of intensity that, you know, my 2 reps in reserve for me, then even coming from an experience, you know, my experience with running, and I guess priding myself on work ethic. You know, it was very humbling to then know that I actually wasn't training as hard as, or, you know, working as hard as I possibly can. So I guess that's where your training environment, you know, who you're around, that sort of thing does have a big impact on how hard you're going to push as well.
There's a couple of really important things that I think you both touched on. I think prior experience and how that frames somebody's perception of effort is hugely important. It can be a very good thing, in my opinion. Obviously, if somebody learns how to run and play sport, and they learn how to push themselves and be disciplined, all those kind of things, when they go to the gym, they're going to be able to experience a little bit of pain and not be too freaked out by that. However, I think you know, there's some trade-offs there when you go to the extreme. So somebody who is really good at like endurance running, pushing themselves when they're, you know, running out of breath and, you know, the legs are aching, all that kind of stuff, they might not be able to push themselves in the same way under a 1 rep max, because it's just completely different hard, right? But in that middle end spectrum where it's like all that, you know, strength endurance stuff, there is a lot of carryover. And I think the other thing that you mentioned, which was really important, was the reps in reserve, and how even though you thought you were training hard and you were 2 reps from failure, you were still well off. So I guess that's how we do measure intensity for muscle growth. It is proximity to failure, and that's the relative intensity, not the absolute intensity, which is weight on the bar, as a percentage of 1 rep max, which is what powerlifters use to define intensity. So intensity of effort, or perception of like perceived exertion, is essentially what we're looking at for hypertrophy. And the literature suggests you want to be within around 4 reps from failure for the most part, especially on isolation exercises. Compound lifts, heavier loads over like 80% of 1 rep max, you can have lower RPs than that. Still build meaningful amount of muscle, but you need to train hard, you need to train close to failure. And the environment, I think, is huge in doing that. Jackson, how are you doing that over in Bali? So I wouldn't imagine the training environment and culture over there would be like hugely sort of in alignment with, I guess, the intensity side of things you need to have, you know, to build muscle at the level you are.
Yeah, not at all. Like there's not really a bodybuilding culture here. Certainly not at the gyms that I'm at. Anyway, so it has had to be very internally driven recently. Like I trained with an Indo guy this week. We did legs, and he was actually a Asian Games medalist in MMA. So like he's used to training pretty hard, not necessarily bodybuilding style training, but hard training. And we did our leg session, and he was completely crippled. And at the end of the session, he was like, "That was a crazy workout, right? Like that's one of the craziest workouts I've ever done." And he's like, "You don't always train like that, right?" And I was like, "Well, sort of do. Like that's sort of the baseline, and actually train a little bit harder when I got more food in me. Like this is me a little bit flat, and that sort of like that blew his mind in a sense. And it just goes back to what you were saying about like it comes down to your own perception of what training hard looks like, and it's going to be predicated by the sort of training environment that you've been around. And that's probably why Bridgette was lucky, because she was able to be exposed to really hard training from a young age, and that was able to frame her own perception of what training hard should actually look like. But for other people who haven't been in a very hard training environment with a high intensity of effort, they might just not know, and they might think they're training hard, but in reality it's substantially lower levels than what other people might be doing. So yeah. And I just wanted to make one more comment about intensity of effort. It should not be confused with training discomfort. So intensity of effort, it can't undermine the principle of training specificity. So like Bridgette said, like you could do some crazy sets of burpees for like 3 minutes straight, and that's going to be extremely uncomfortable training, and someone with limited knowledge might perceive that as being a higher intensity of effort than, let's say, a max set of 12 dumbbell press to failure or something like that. But we need to understand that it can't undermine the training principle of specificity, and the training that you're doing needs to be specific to the goals and adaptations that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah. I'll say one thing on that. When we're talking about intensity of effort, we're talking about your proximity to failure, and we're talking about muscular failure as well. We're not talking about technical failure or volitional interruption. So these are really important distinctions that I think more people should be aware of. So technical failure is obviously when your technique breaks down, but your muscles still have a bit of juice to go. Say, for example, your stabilizers, you don't have the trunk stability in a squat, you flex and you can't move the weight, but your quads probably had a little bit more juice than that's technical failure, where you misgroove the rep on a squat, you fall forward, you dump it. It's not because your quads moved it, it was your technique. And then volitional interruption, which is ceasing a set or terminating a set early because basically you're giving up, which is failure in its own way, but it's volitional interruption. It's not muscular failure where you can't produce the required amount of force to overcome gravity, essentially. So that's what we're talking about. And you'll see that in the last few reps where the cadence of the rep really slows down. That's when you're reaching muscular failure. And that's what we sort of look for when we're trying to find our rating of perceived exertion, so RP or reps from reserve, is that slowdown in the repetition speed. So Bridgette, obviously, as Jackson said, you didn't work hard. You have no genetics that were going to make you a good WBF competitor. It was just you found yourself in a lucky position, learning how to train hard really early.
Yeah.
So on that note, what are your recommendations for someone who is looking to figure out if they're training hard enough and determine what they need to do to train harder, and if they need to train harder?
I think, getting a coach is obviously going to be number one. It's going to help you, especially if you're new to training, you're not really sure. That's another thing. A lot of people actually think they're pushing to their absolute limits. I, have had clients send me videos just for form and technique and go, this was the hardest set. Like I'm at failure here. And, I guess a good way of, I guess, explaining it to them, for me, I've found is, look how quick that concentric phase is. That final rep is coming up so fast, and you're telling me that you're at failure. If it was failure, it would be an absolute grinder. And that's what I want you to chase when I want you to train close to failure, is those final few reps being slower and slower and slower. At the start of the set, they might come up, fairly quick, and as you're getting closer to failure, they will start to slow down. And I guess that's been the easiest way for me to explain, how to train harder and how to know that you're close to failure is, the speed of that concentric phase.
Perfect. And what's some of your other advice, I guess, for people who just might not enjoy the discomfort, that they experience when they train close to failure, because it does hurt. It hurts. And for a lot of people, I know a lot of people really, they almost get shell shocked when they get like that, metabolic waste build up or just the discomfort. Like they almost freeze and like they just stop. Like I've seen a lot of those people. I don't know if you guys have as well. But some people just really seem to have this avoidance of the pain or very low pain tolerance. So what's your advice for someone who might need to work through, I guess, some mental blocks?
Take up chess.
What was that?
Take up chess.
Take a well, that's the thing, you've got to, if you hate working, if you hate training, if you don't like pushing hard, I guess you got to ask yourself or ask that person, why do you train? Do you train for enjoyment or do you train to build muscle? Because if building muscle is the goal and you don't want to push, well, I'm sorry, but it's just not going to happen.
Yep.
I think that people need to be real with themselves. And, if you're constantly living in denial or hating training, but you're wanting this goal so badly to build muscle, I think it's, you have to come in and say, look, okay, something needs to give here. I need to be willing to do something I've never done if I want to get something that I've never had. And I often have these conversations, with clients, because we get in our own heads and we tell ourselves that we want something, but we're not willing to put in the work to get there. So I think it's just becoming more aware, really, of what you want.
I like that. So what about you? How do you approach this with your clients?
In terms of getting them to train hard?
Yeah.
I think like trying to frame what hard training is, like just like anchoring like what their current perceptions and that sensation of, oh, this is hard. Like what Bridgette was explaining earlier, where they'll like send through a video or something and they'll be like, this was hard. And you're like, hard? That was like barely even a warm-up set. And I think it's a really slow process at times, but I think sometimes you can get those like aha moments where, you'll explain to a client and you'll be like, their perception of what is challenging, what they can actually do, they're so dissimilar, and you just need to gradually be building that gap or bridging that gap. I don't think it's something that necessarily just happens, instantaneously, although sometimes like it does, and you'll find like you will have that moment with the client. You'll be like, okay, watch this setback, you record it, and you're like looking at their speed and you're explaining to them, like with them, okay, yes, it feels hard and it feels challenging and it's feeling uncomfortable, but it's not actually close enough to the capacity that you are actually capable of. Like, and that's something that Jackson was talking about. It's like there's uncomfortable, it's like, yeah, not having a bar on your back and like feeling like your squats are slowing down. That's not a comfortable feeling. But, if you're watching it back and you're like, oh, they look quite good, or the speed's there, you like, I guess we're trying to frame it and demonstrate to them objectively why we're saying it's not hard. Because obviously internally their experience of whatever it was, they're like, this was hard, this was challenging training. And then we're trying to just reframe that and say, okay, it's not, this is why we believe it's not, objective measures here. Like you could pull out a velocity tracker and say, okay, we're going to track yours, and you could compare them to someone else and say, okay, you're saying their set looked hard and you're saying your set looked hard, and you could compare the speed of the reps when they're finishing the set. I always think a good one, like an actual practical way of, demonstrating this with clients in a safe capacity, is like get them on like an exercise that's super safe, like a leg extension or a bicep curl, something where the technical demand is super low, risk of injury is super low, and you can just be like, okay, do a set, go till an RP7 or RIR of 3, whatever. You're going to set an objective metric for them to try and achieve. When they get there, say, okay, how many more reps do you think you could do? They should answer with whatever they've said is their target, and then just make them keep going and actually push them. And like having that drive, someone excellently saying, you can do more, and you can push, and then actually them doing it, right? When it's uncomfortable, but it's not unsafe. You're not risking really hurting them all that much. Maybe they get 5-10 reps out. Maybe they keep going. Like I have literally had clients do 20 plus reps on a hack squat because one of my clients, Edith, right? She's like one of these people who never really did any sport when she was like growing up, right?
We love it.
Edith is like super smart. She's like a smart person, and she's like did like 10 reps on the hack squat. And she's like, oh, I only had like 2 more. And I'm like, man, no, you didn't. I'm like, keep squatting. I'll tell you when you can stop. And she did like 25 reps at like 50 kilos or something. And it's like, you were going to stop 15 reps short of the RPE that we were looking for. Like, that's not even a warm up at that point. Like,
I think, yeah, for sure. I think that, you know, psychologically, people get in their own head. They see like 10 reps on their program and they're like, that's all I need to do. That's it.
Yeah.
I'm just going to stop as soon as I hit 10. And especially those that are new to training, they're not very aware of how much they need to put on, you know, how much weight they need to use to get close to failure at that, you know, 10 reps. So, you know, for me, it's like I always say those reps are a guide. They're a guide for the weight selection that you use. But if you have more in the tank, you keep going and you track that. And then next week or next day, you know, you can go up in weight to get closer to the recommended reps. But I think it's important that people realize that those reps aren't set in stone. They're just a guide. Your intensity is more important.
I was literally explaining this to Timmy yesterday. I was like, okay, it's like Timmy, he's going to hopefully be watching this and listening to this as he's editing, making us sound and look really pretty. But yeah, the reps, like oftentimes they're just a gauge. Like they're not a hard and fast number. You know, if even sets, right? If you do your first set and you go to like 14 reps and it was like prescribed 6 to 10 and you go to 14 because you're like, that was way too easy. Like, don't even count it as a set. Call it a warm-up. Rest a little bit longer and then do another set with the load that's actually appropriate, right? And how many times will people be cutting themselves short of productive sets of training? Like not just reps in the set, but actual sets of training. They'll do like, you know, 1 or 2 sets and it's like, call it an RPE 7. And it's like, we're presuming that most people get their, you know, perceived exertions like wrong. And, you know, if they're underselling themselves, those wouldn't even be warm-up sets. So they might be getting 1 productive set out of every 3 or 4. And it's like, what you're spending an hour and a half in the gym, but like half of your training is nearly redundant. Like you're doing all this work before, then you do 1 challenging set and then you move on to the next exercise. That's why, like, I really think that people, you know, this is something I was saying to like Jason and Martin, is like, I don't think a program, it really even like kicks off until maybe like week 3. Like that's where you might maybe find your groove, particularly if you made a lot of changes in the program, because week 1, you're kind of finding your feet, like trying to work out what loads are appropriate, particularly if it's a new program and you haven't done exercises before. You're looking at the way the exercises are structured, the order of the exercises, order of the week, how you're going to recover. So it's like, you don't want to like, you know, mess yourself up. So you may be a little bit more cautious. Week 2, you're still finding your feet, but you have a better idea. And then it's like week 3 and you actually start getting some sort of semblance of productive training in. And then people end their program at week 4. So it's like you maybe had like 1 week of decent programming. And that's presuming that you were actually training, you know, with the appropriate levels of intensity, which, you know, maybe not.
2 things. 1, Gym Goss listeners, that is Samuel Skeppers, ladies and gentlemen. I don't think you've heard him talk that much in the previous 4 episodes.
Very passionate about training hard.
Caffeine and intensity training. Sam's go to. I just had to have a stab. Sam's been smart ass off the air all day, so it was my turn to have a stab. He doesn't like that. Anyway, Jackson, talk to me about whether or not you think that you can overdo, and people do overdo the intensity side of things, because I feel general advice, as Sam and Bridgette have sort of put forward to this point, is universally good advice. Most people need to train harder, period. There are some people who train too hard and who are probably going to be better off training further from failure because they push it too far too often. And I guess, how does that fit in with what you do, what you advise, and your advice for those people, whether you think they need to dial back a little bit, why, how they can do that?
Yeah, so I definitely think, before I answer the question properly, a more common problem is people not taking themselves to their limit often enough and leaving gains on the table. But there is a handful for sure that are probably doing too much that they can recover from. I don't think that pushing yourself too hard is possible, but pushing yourself too hard too often can be a problem. So it comes down to like a volume management thing. So like there are people who are doing like 20 to 25 sets in a session. Now, if a bunch of those sets are submaximal, like uppy 7s and 8s, then it's very realistic to be able to assume that you can recover from that stuff. But if you are going balls to the wall for those 25 sets and taking every single one of those sets to failure, then it is very unlikely that you'll be able to recover from that sort of volume. And most likely, there's just a chunk of that work that you're doing that's probably not contributing to further anabolism or further gains. So for me, like specifically, like I was one of those guys that would do a lot of sets per session, and a fair chunk of those would be sub-max sets and leaving a few reps in the tank. But since transitioning to a different style of training, which I believe is a more productive style of training, which has delivered me more progress in recent months, is to be doing less overall sets per session, but really taking those sets to my limit. So it's almost funny, like I'm almost doing the same amount of balls to the wall sets as I was doing before. I've just trimmed out a bunch of those sub-max sets. And it's made me think that perhaps when you do get to more of an advanced level, when you've been like a reasonable level of muscularity and a fair few years of hard training under the belt, it's making me think that perhaps those sub-max sets just aren't contributing to anabolism as much as they were in your early years of lifting, and aren't providing as much of a stimulus as they were sort of in your first few years of lifting. And it's making me think that to sort of progress further, to going from like intermediate to advanced to like very advanced, the only thing that's going to allow you to do that is sets that are truly at your limit and beyond your limit. And those sub-max sets that sort of were anabolic and helpful in the past probably don't have that much utility anymore. And it's probably better off restricting your overall volume that you're doing, but just making sure that the volume that you do is absolute quality and with a very high intensity of effort. I don't think I answered your question at all then, just thinking back to that.
So Jackson, are you trying to tell us that you're an intermediate lifter?
In the bracket between intermediate and advanced.
Wow.
And that little step.
Yeah. Like you're crossing the line.
Yeah,
like that.
I'm on the border.
Are you going to put your left foot forward or your right foot forward, Jack?
Left's on the line, right's about to go over.
Damn, he's crossing it.
No, you indirectly answered the question, which is, I guess, the issue for folks who are training too hard and having recovery problems is not so much that they're training too hard. It is that a dosing issue. They're doing too much or too often. So you did answer it. Cool. Well, I think, there's a lot of really useful discussion there. And there's not a lot else that we there is, but we won't have time to cover everything else otherwise. So we're going to move on to building a physique versus burning calories. And that's another, I guess, one of those misconceptions that people have, when they go to the gym. They've got their Fitbit on, or they jump on a treadmill, or even do a weight session. They try to track how many calories they're burning. Bridgette, what are your thoughts on this?
I think that a lot of people overestimate how many calories they think they burn weight training. So many people think that like they're doing some miraculous thing to energy balance when they go and have a session at gym. And it's just not the case. I think that you guys would probably have like the research to back that up. You don't burn as many calories as you think you do in a weight session. So that's probably the biggest misconception, honestly, that people think. I often have clients say, look, because I missed this session and that session, like I haven't had the fat loss that I've wanted this week, and it's simply just not because of that, because they've missed the sessions. It's just because of most likely their nutrition wasn't on point. So yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. Jackson,
Completely concur.
and how do you think that feeds into, somebody's, I guess, ideology around exercise? Do you think the people who are worried about calorie burning are going to be able to build an impressive physique with that kind of mindset?
No, it's going to be detrimental. Like the perfect example is the inexperienced lifter going through one of their first contest preps, and the way that they restructure their training in the fat loss phase of the contest prep by reducing the loads, increasing the reps substantially, and reducing the rest time substantially, with the assumption that this is going to have a profound effect on energy expenditure and fat loss, when in reality it becomes a recipe for muscle loss, because now you've substantially reduced the training stimulus that allowed you to build the muscle in the first place. You're now restricting your loads, and you're restricting the tension stimulus that's going through the muscle. And this is why often a lot of people in their first few preps, if they don't have the right guidance, they do lose a lot of muscle in those final stages of the contest prep. Like the way that we need to think about it is the way that we trained in our off season to build the muscle, or to build the moist muscle, is going to be the style of training that's going to allow us to retain the moist muscles as we drive down the fat. Now, when trying to build an impressive physique, i.e. with high muscularity, the training quality needs to be as high as possible. And you need to be able to handle and recover from the highest loads that you can tolerate in your desired rep range. Now, that is not going to happen if you are training with the goal to burn as many calories as possible. And the way that you might do that is by, again, circuit training, really, really low rest times, trying to keep heart rate up and breath rate high. Because basically what that does is it keeps systemic and local fatigue basically chronically high throughout the entire session. It means that your performance in subsequent sets is going to be hampered. And the amount of tensional stimulus that you're going to be able to reduce is just significantly impaired throughout your entire session. So people need to understand that fat loss and training for muscle growth, they're not mutually conducive. So when you are training in the gym, the goal should be to create an anabolic stimulus. That anabolic stimulus is only going to be maximized when you're training in an 8 to 15 rep range and you're recovering adequately between those sets. Save your fat loss style training for your cardio work and your steps and your energy expenditure that's happening outside of the gym. Don't try and combine them both together, because if you do, you'll basically just end up sort of cutting your ankles in terms of how much muscle gain you're able to create.
I think that was pretty comprehensive answer. I think, focusing on calorie expenditure is a fool's errand when it comes to training, especially resistance training. All right, so something that you wanted to discuss today, well, I've wanted to discuss for a long time actually, is diversifying client goals and shifting away from a purely aesthetics focused objective. And I think for a lot of people that sounds counterintuitive, but I think it's really important. And Bridgette, you've probably got some insights into this. You coach mostly women, I'd imagine.
Yeah, so I think, building a great physique takes such a long time. Muscle growth is such a slow process. And if you're forever fixated on what you look like and you're forever looking in the mirror every day to see what's grown and what hasn't, you're going to send yourself mad if you have no other goals. So obviously the aesthetic goal is going to be in the background. That's what you're going to gym for, and you're training this, spending so much of your life doing this. That's, obviously still going to always be there. But to not have any other goal, I feel like will just send you completely mad. So I guess for me and for my clients, something that I really try and implement is, performance goals, making sure that you care about what you're doing. and you have that inner competitiveness within yourself to beat what you did last week. And I think that chase and having that interest in performance really does help. And it's obviously going to help with your physique as well along the way. But I think it's just, getting so fixated on what you look like all the time, it's just going to send you mad, because as I say, it takes such a long time to build muscle. I think people don't realize how long it takes. So
Jackson, as someone who's extremely experienced with being fixated on themselves in the mirror, how do you deal with that day to day?
I'll just be honest and say that, like, it's something I struggle with. Like, I'm not someone, this is also one of my coaching weaknesses, is I'm not a great coach for clients that just want to do 65-70% effort with their diet and their training and have a bunch of fun and muck around and other. Like, I understand that's a very normal way of living and an enjoyable way of living for a lot of people. But I also very much struggle to put myself on that same level of mindset, because I am very much someone who has realized that I'm only really able to progress in a noticeable fashion if I'm tunnel vision on one thing. And the second I start having secondary goals is the moment that I stop progressing. The progression slows substantially. And like, I just look back on my last few years where, like, I was focusing a lot on PhD and I was boxing and doing a bunch of other things, and just sort of, I was a jack of all trades and master of nothing. And it's only I really noticed in these last sort of 6 to 8 months where my physique has really sort of come up, and when people are like, oh shit, like he got better. That only really happened when I was able to put all my eggs in one basket. So something that I am really working on is being able to work with those clients that don't share that same either desire to put all their eggs in one basket, or clients that do have secondary and tertiary goals in the domains, and how can I manage them to be able to still make some progress in the diet and the training realm, but not to be at the expense of their other things that they're trying to improve on in their life.
I think for sure, like, your expectations have to match your effort. I think that if you can accept that and know that if you're not going to put in 100%, like somebody like you, Jackson, that you're not going to get 100% back. It's going to be a slower process. I think that the biggest thing is, making people realize that you get out what you put in. So.
Totally agree with that. I think for the most part, the issue that I see most people run into, even if they are trying to, so here's an interesting take on this, I think. People who are trying to put all their eggs in the aesthetics basket, because they overvalue their weight and their shape, the research is quite convincing on this, that one of the primary determinants for binge eating disorder is an overvaluation of weight and shape. So I think, as you said, Bridgette, like diversifying your goals and, having your eggs in many different baskets, for most people, when they're not trying to, maximize, elite levels of, conditioning and stuff like that. At that point, you should have a lot of these, sort of eating behavior stuff taken care of for the most part. You'll go in and out of eating disorders during your competitive life, but for the most part, you'll be on top of that. But for most people, the general population who are trying to get leaner, if they have an overvaluation of weight and shape, that's going to prime them for eating disorders. And I think that's something that took me a long time to sort of realize and to navigate with clients, is how to help them value their weight and shape and their aesthetics less. Because it's a very hard thing to do, because everyone values how they look quite highly, especially now with, social media and all the other, aesthetic ideals that we try to uphold and are exposed to on a, minute to minute basis. It's very, very challenging to do that. So any tips, Bridgette, you would have for somebody or coaches who are looking to help their clients change their or diversify their self-worth portfolio, essentially?
Sorry, I just didn't hear that last bit. What did you say? Sorry.
any advice to coaches or people who are wanting to diversify their self-worth portfolio, so value their aesthetics less?
I think start to get other goals around what you're doing. So, performance is a great one, but also just enjoying other things that also, I guess, complement what you're trying to do. So, for example, enjoy walks along the beach with your friends on a Sunday morning. For example, you're getting your steps in, but you're also socializing and making time for friends as well. Try and incorporate, what your goal is aesthetically around other parts of your life, so that you're also working on other bits, and you're not just so fixated on what you're doing. If you need to take time off tracking data and things like that, do it, to regain that sort of, I guess, to be more comfortable with jumping on the scales and not having that attachment or emotional tie to what the number says. That's something that I'm often having to do, is, try and redirect the focus there to something else. Numbers aren't everything, and sometimes it takes letting go of doing something like tracking or jumping on the scales every single day to actually realize that it's not the be all end all to what you're trying to do. So yeah.
Samuel, any advice? It's probably hard for you to give any objective advice now that you're in prep. You get that prep tunnel vision.
No, like I think it's something that I find I'm often doing with clients, is trying to ensure that it's like, we don't want to be, as Jackson kind of alluded to earlier, we don't want to be chasing multiple different rabbits, because then sometimes you don't catch one. But I guess it really comes down to, as Bridgette alluded to, aligning those goals and making them, if you can redirect attention. Sorry?
They have to be compatible.
Yeah. So that if you can redirect attention and say, okay, well, we're not like, yeah, we're going to try and work on your physique and we want to train hard and we're going to do these things. And yeah, we're going to put effort in, but it's not all about having abs and it's not all about this. And we can say, okay, having multiple kind of little check boxes along the way that kind of will get you closer to that overarching goal, can really help, just redirecting attention without redirecting effort. I think, like, you're not taking effort away from that more, say we are concerned with our aesthetics and the way we look, right? But we can still focus on getting stronger, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But at a point, we're just trying to, like, say, balance. Well, yeah, long term, you have this physique development goal, and we don't want to obsess about that. And we want to focus on these other things. So why not, in the meantime, we can focus on, say, improving your bench press strength or, your squat strength. And I think it's just a matter of, then you're not going completely one way or the other and saying, okay, well, now we're just doing singles on the squats, because that's not necessarily going to help the physique development per se. So I think, good coaches will be able to really marry that up and identify when it is appropriate for someone to actually just move away completely from physique related goals. And that does sometimes come up if there's someone who's just like, they're clearly not in a state, psychologically, their life's just not in a situation where it's appropriate for them to be focusing on, making these drastic, say, dietary changes, or, like they want to diet. Like, how many times do we see it where there's someone who's like, they want to do a prep, and we know as a coach that they want to do it for all the wrong reasons, right? They saw someone do it, they've gone through a breakup or some sort of like tragedy or trauma in life or whatever, and they need this external thing to, like, hold on to, and it's like, this is my thing now. And I think when, like, in those situations, yeah, it might be really appropriate to, like, just take a full step away and, try and not do harm. But yeah, for the most part, just making sure that when you do step away from the physique related goals, even if they're still going to be there, just making sure that the other goals that you have are supportive and conducive to that longer term physique development.
I think I've got some thoughts on this. I'd like to hear all of your opinions. I think that having an aesthetic focus is a very good thing initially, because it's usually what motivates people and gets them into the gym wanting to change in the first place. And it can be a pretty powerful driver of their behavior, for many reasons. But over time, it just doesn't seem to really last. The more people focus on their body, the more fixated they become. It turns into, for many people, self-sabotage. You get this over-evaluation of weight and shape, binge eating. They start to have, body dysmorphia, all these kind of things. It can be a very negative thing. So I think you almost need to channel that aesthetic focus at the start, but then have it almost like just filter to the back of your mind as you go through your training career, because you can't forget about it if you're training for aesthetic goals. Like, that is the goal, so you have to keep tabs on it. But to only let it come to the forefront of your mind on a very sort of like predetermined, semi-regular sort of timeline. So, once a month, you really have a look at your physique, you do your posing, your photos, your videos. This is off season, obviously. Prep's a completely different animal. And you're really just not looking at your physique as much, in such a, I guess, critical way. Because I think that's the issue, is that when you're looking at your physique, you're making those comparisons to others and you're being very critical. So I think maybe saving that for like once a month at a dedicated pre-planned time, so that you can approach that and navigate it as best you can, without any issues. What do you guys think about that? Is that something that you would say aligns with your own experiences?
It's in the way of a lot of people developing their physique is this fixation on being lean or being scared to put on any body fat, in a building phase. I have this conversation a lot with some of my girls that, they've reached a point, they're over the newbie gains. They're not getting any more newbie gains at maintenance, and they need to then step it up and possibly, go into a building phase. But their fear is that they're going to put on body fat. They're not going to be as shredded or as lean as they, are right now. And, I try to make them understand, well, this is it then. This is your point. You're not going to develop your physique and reach those aesthetic goals that you have if you don't shift away from that focus on what you look like and lean into stuff like performance.
Yep.
And thinking about, your long-term goals. So I do think, as you say, initially, aesthetics, it works. It gets that motivation rolling. But there's going to be a point in time where you realize that what you look like isn't everything, and it's not going to be the, motivator forever. So.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I think we better get into the Q&A, and we've got some interesting ones today that I'm looking forward to hearing Jackson try to answer. I love watching Jackson squirm, one of my favorite pastimes. So let's get into it, Sam.
All right. Okay, welcome to the Q&A section. This is obviously the best part because it's moderated by me. So we get to hear a little bit more of my voice. First question. We'll address it to you, Bridgette, and then potentially open it up. So I haven't actually ordered them today in terms of, some rapid fire ones, but there will be hopefully a couple in here that we can get some rapid fire responses from everyone. Anyway, first question. Bridgette, considerations for training around your cycle. So I guess just summarizing the key things that you would want to be keeping in mind at the various stages of your menstrual cycle and how that relates to training. Go for it.
So I think this is another reason why it's super important to track your progress with training, because although there's certain trends that can happen throughout your cycle in regards to, appetite, training, performance, things like that, everyone is different. And, some people notice strength decreases and increases throughout their cycle depending on where they are. Some don't at all. So if you just read something, for example, of what is typically the case, you get inside your own head and tell yourself that you can't do something around that time of month or, et cetera, et cetera. So I think tracking your own progress and keeping a journal for myself, I like to write how I'm feeling around each, phase of the month. Then I know my norms. And that's the most important thing, to understand what your norms are so that you know what to expect, because everyone is different. So tracking your cycle, tracking your progress, and monitoring how things change, because you'll notice trends. Typically, you'll notice trends, and everyone will be a little bit different. So that's usually how I like to go about training around your cycle.
Cool. Does anyone have anything that they would like to add?
Yeah, so if we're going off the research and the literature, it does suggest, or it does show that females generally have superior strength performance in the follicular phase compared to the luteal. And this is most likely due to high levels of estrogen during this phase, which has been speculated to have elevations in mood, energy, and to improve recovery as well. But with all that said, I tend to agree with what Bridgette's saying, and that from a practical perspective, I don't put too much talk in it, because what can happen is females get in this mindset of, oh, the luteal phase is coming around, all my lifts are going to go down now, and it tends to become sort of this self-fulfilling prophecy. So, yeah, in practice, I really don't think it's too beneficial to give too much thought about it. And I'm not an advocate of adjusting your training approach depending on what week of the cycle that you're in.
Really interesting.
I'm with Jackson on that. I think that, yes, there's these hormonal fluctuations, and they can definitely, for some women, impair their performance, increase hunger, recovery, all those kind of things, like mood swings. There's a host of different things that women experience on differing levels, at various points in their cycle. But it's one of those things that it's almost like the boogeyman, in my opinion. After all these years of coaching women, it's like, yeah, we know it exists. We know that there's something there, but it's like we can never really grab a hold of it and like make it something really meaningfully, tangible in practice. To be like, well, we know you're going to lose about 10% of strength on this day. Your recovery is going to be impaired by X amount. Therefore, we need to take out this much volume. You just have to auto-regulate as you would any other training session. You hit your RPE. That might mean on a certain day, it's a few reps less. You might have to drop the weight a little bit. Maybe you do take off 1 or 2 sets here and there if you're really feeling the pinch, whatever it may be. But I just think auto-regulation, that concept still universally applies to the menstrual cycle. And I think a lot of the, which I was guilty of historically, is like, making hard and fast sort of recommendations based on, the hormonal changes and whatnot. But now I'm just much more inclined to say that that's very overstated.
See, I have a slightly different perspective. I think that depending on the individual, there are some females who do monitor their own cycles probably a little bit more than others, and therefore, I guess the overarching kind of feedback that I'll generally give to those clients is just to be making sure that it's like, if you find that at a certain phase, you're individually, personally, your performance does really suffer. And I'm also wary of the fact that sometimes people convince themselves and kind of like nocebo themselves into certain situations, but just to like kind of use their intuition to adjust their loads, or reps and sets, to make sure that they're not going to be potentially biting off more than they can chew or doing any damage. It's like we talk about training hard, but I guess if you're physiologically, it's like they're in a slightly different state, a result of wherever they're at in their period, and all of a sudden, or the menstrual cycle, all of a sudden performance kind of just takes a massive plunge. Like, do you just keep pushing anyway, or do you just adjust and do what you can to try and replicate or get to the desired intensity level, like we spoke about this earlier? So I definitely think there should be some sort of adjustments made, but also just generally being wary of making too many, because then it's just going to make that whole training process a little bit more complex than it already is.
Yeah, I think the adjustments definitely need to be made. I just think they need to be made more reactive rather than proactive.
Yeah. Okay. So you're not saying, oh, okay, week 4 we're gonna drop everything
Yeah,
because
because
we're
you can't,
anticipating this.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That
So
makes
changes
sense.
need to be made, definitely. Like, and again, but the research has shown like such a wide um, array of like variance in how women respond to the weeks leading into their like menstrual cycle. Um, some women experience absolutely no symptoms, whereas other women have all the symptoms and they're like in bed. It's almost debilitating. Like they can't get out of bed for a few days. It's like there's a huge variance, between individuals. So I think that's why it's best to have a reactive approach. And I also think that even women experience different degrees of those symptoms from month to month, at least in my experience and from what I've been seeing in practice. So I think having even a woman who's tracking their menstrual cycle regularly and you're getting all that data, very good data, you're still going to have a hard time predicting and being proactive with, what approach is going to be best and at what time point, because it can still change month to month to month. So that's just my thoughts. Bridgette, what else do you have to say on that? Because I'm sure you probably have a lot more experience than I do with these kind of things, as well as coaching more females.
Yeah, I'm the same as you. I'm more like on a reactive basis. If they're coming up to that time of the month and they're noticing straight away that their strength is dropping, that might have the frequency might have to go down, volume might have to go down. I'll alter it to suit, but I definitely don't plan it in advance for them to drop anything out unless they need to. Personally, for me, I don't notice any changes to my strength ever. It's definitely not around my menstrual cycle anyway. If there's other factors I notice that can drop my strength, but not around my cycle. And I've tracked my cycle for quite a long time and sort of cross-referenced it with my training performance, and nothing changes. So I don't like to put into people's heads that they can't train hard around this, around certain times of the month, because then it comes back down to that psychological, like you're already telling yourself you can't do it, so you're not going to do it type thing. So yeah, more reactive, if they're struggling, if they need to, or if they know that they do around certain times in the month need to drop it back a bit, we'll program that in advance. But I try not to if it doesn't need to happen.
Cool. All right, let's move
Jackson,
on.
that's
Next.
really creepy seeing those people like sliding in the door in the shadows.
There's always someone lurking behind. Next question. So it should be a quick one. Do you guys drink chlorine and fluoride water or filtered water? I'll go first. I drink tap water. It's delicious. Next, Jackson, what do you drink currently in Bali?
If I drank tap water here, I'd probably die pretty quick.
Mate, aren't you Balinese yet? Don't you like haven't you transcended that and your stomach is like rock solid?
Yeah, well, I never get sick here anymore. But I have been to Bali every year.
But you are also avoiding drinking the water, so.
Yeah, I wouldn't drink it straight. Like I think that's.
Do you brush your teeth with it?
I think. Yeah.
I run the gauntlet. I brush my teeth with it if I was in Bali or Thailand.
I brush my teeth with it and I'm fine. But I think if you're drinking 6 liters of it a day, that could be asking for trouble. So I just drink in my villa we just get the filtered big bottles that get dropped off. But yeah, I just drink that. But what is chlorine water? Can we talk about that for a second? Is that pool water?
Yeah, pool water.
Pool water. Well, I don't know much about tap water, but I think all of it is treated to a degree. Like at our grandparents' old place, they used to drink bore water. I'm not sure if anyone's ever had bore water. So basically, they're just like drilling it out of the ground. That tastes something else, and it's like that's an adjustment period. But yeah, it's like it's like it wouldn't like make you sick or anything, but it's like we would go down there and you drink bottled water because like the taste difference is just like so like like even like there are people who live there that do not drink the bore water. It's like that's just what comes out of taps. Anyway, I think that's probably enough talk on water. Problems with reverse T3. Any suggestions? I think Jackson was going to try and answer this one.
You did. Yeah, just dosing in endo. Your reverse T3 hormonal levels are generally tightly linked to your T3 levels. So basically, what we're speaking about there is you could potentially be hypothyroid or hyperthyroid. Both have negative health consequences, but both conditions can be treated with the correct medication. So if you do have problems with your reverse T3, and I'm interpreting that as meaning your reverse T3 hormonal levels are out of the physiological range with your blood tests, then I would go see an endo, and most likely they'll be able to get you some medication that will be able to bring it back in range.
Cool. Bridgette, Jacob, anything to add?
I just want to say that I think it's really important for people to know where to ask certain questions. And I don't mean that as an insult. I mean that with as much love as I can express, because you're only doing yourself a disservice. It's only going to hinder your ability to learn and get access to good information if you don't know where to ask the right questions. A question like this is like something that we can try, and we can probably point you in the right direction of certain things. Jackson, obviously you respect and value what Bridget has to say, and hopefully what we have to say, and that's very flattering and whatnot. Jackson gave a good answer, but at the same time, if you had known where to direct that question through a little bit of research or just asking a few people, which is what you've done here, so that's fantastic. But I think over time you need to get better, and I think this is just something I want to put out there. People need to get better at asking questions and knowing the right questions to ask and where to ask them. I think if you learn to develop that skill in and of itself, it's going to help you in many, many ways. Yes, Jackson, I'll allow you to talk now.
I am so glad you brought this up. Like recently, I've been getting some questions that have just blown my mind. Like I'm talking, hey Jackson, I'm recently recovering from a heart attack. I just want to know what sort of strategies I should be using post heart attack. I've had questions. I've just been diagnosed with breast cancer. I'm wondering what I should be eating and how to manage this. It's like, fuck, like my expertise is nutrition for the improvement of the physique and sports performance. That is my expertise. Like, if you want to be knowing how nutrition for cardiovascular health, go speak to a cardiovascular specialist. If you want to know the cancer treatments, go and speak to a cancer specialist. Like, just because like people might see us as potentially knowing a reasonable amount in one domain does not mean we know everything about everything. Like, we're not experts in every area, and there's a lot of areas where we just don't know too much. And like Jacob said, like you need to know where to direct your question to the right place. Like you wouldn't be taking your car to get fixed to a dentist, right? You'd be taking it to a mechanic. It's the same fucking thing. Like, don't be asking a sports student.
You wouldn't
be taking a car to get fixed at a dentist. No, you wouldn't
do that.
The dentist probably not going to do a good job now.
I'm going to get my car from the dentist. That's why it keeps not working. Damn it. I think you guys raise a really good point without beating a dead horse.
I can't follow on from that. So
people need to go to the right places for information, and a lot of the time,
don't take your car to a dentist.
Yeah, don't take your car to a dentist. Don't ask a bricklayer for advice about the stock exchange. All right, next question. I'm just going to field through the ones that are not in our field of practice now, because for those who have asked questions that are outside of our scope, we're just going to direct you elsewhere. Okay. Best heart protective supplements. Again, probably go speak to cardiovascular professional. Best way to mitigate estrogen naturally. Well, I guess if you're a female, you probably don't want to mitigate too much estrogen. Even males probably don't want to mitigate too much estrogen. I'm unsure how to answer. Not my area anyway.
You really don't have many tools at your disposal. It's like saying how to manipulate natural testosterone levels. You just really can't. Yeah, it's the same sort of thing. So
let's move on to the
yeah.
next. All right, we're just going to answer the questions we can answer, I think. Okay, is it an issue to lose more than 10% of body weight during a cut? For example, 11 to 15%. So I'm going to start on this one. Like, I think sometimes people think that there's these magic numbers in like health and fitness training, diet, whatever interventions, where it's like all of a sudden you get to this like threshold number. It's like 10%, and anything beyond like 10.01 and now it's unsafe. Like it's all, everything's always in ranges, right? It's like on a spectrum of like, you know, what is reasonable, what is not. And there's like a trade-off along that spectrum of anything. Okay. So losing 10% of body weight is not an issue, but it depends on the context, of course. So I think to answer that question, no, but it really depends on the individual context at the start. Like if you have way more, if you're like super high body fat percentage, maybe you're obese, morbidly obese, you know, on your standard BMI, losing 10% of your body weight during a cut's probably a very reasonable and healthy thing. If you're someone who is anorexic already, that's a different kettle of fish, and maybe losing 10% of body weight is not appropriate. Okay. So I guess individual context really does matter in determining whether or not or how much weight is appropriate like to lose. And then, you know, that's really it. You have to kind of look at your starting body composition, what you're trying to achieve, and then there's just going to be different consequences and, you know, trade-offs in terms of like health, well-being, things like that along that process. Bridgette, Jacob Jackson, anything to add?
I think you're spot on there. Can you hear me? Yeah, spot on. I can't. Yeah. 100%.
I agree. I think that the rationale behind the 10% body weight per sort of dieting phase is along the lines of you need to learn how to maintain your weight loss. And once you reach that point, that's a good amount of relative weight to have lost to then go into a maintenance phase and just put, you know, pause on the hypocaloric dieting or eating at a calorie deficit. So I think that's why those recommendations exist, is to prevent people from continually dieting longer and longer, burning themselves out, then regaining all the weight they lost. I think those recommendations are there purely to put a finish line on the diet for people, the perpetual dieter, so to speak.
Generally, I have like this kind of little rule that I use for myself. If the client's above 15% body fat and below 25%, and this is obviously for male, 10% body weight loss is usually my stopping point for their weight loss diet. And that usually gets them like somewhere around like the 8 to 10% body fat range usually. Now, if they're above 25% body fat, the 10% body weight loss point is usually my diet break point that I'll have for them. And that'll just be a diet break point where we'll go out to maintenance and we'll just review. And if they've got more in the tank, I'll push them down for another block of dieting. If they're pretty beat and burnt, then usually I'll just call that as a stopping point as well when we start transitioning food up. But yeah, to answer the question more specifically, no, like 10% is not too much.
Yeah, I agree. Let's move on. Next question. Let's just go 2 more questions. Are any of those lads single? Yeah, I'm single. Kayla, I'm single. Kayla says I'm single also. Anyone else want to answer? Jacob, are you single? No, he's not. And he's also muted, but there you go.
That was deliberate, guys.
Strategic. So we're just assuming he said no, but he could have said yes. Well,
I'm married to the iron.
Bridgette, you're not a lad. By my definition, anyway. You can.
What was that?
I said you're not one of the. You're not a lad by my definition.
I don't have to answer.
You're on the podcast, so you're allowed to.
Yeah, you are. You have to be. All right. Okay. So last 2 questions. These are going to be rapid fire. Who's got the biggest carbs? I say me relative to size. Now I'm jacked. My carbs. My calves are humongous. Next, who's competing for second?
Samuel, that's
I reckon realistically, Jacob's got to be, if we're talking circumferences, pull out the tape measure, I think Jacob would be number 1, I'd be 2, Sam would be 3, and Bridgette would just be behind in 4. Just.
Bridgette's probably got me. She's probably got me on toast as well.
Speaking of measure our carbs, I feel like I'm going to be first or second.
Damn, she's
I feel like
flexing on
I'm
us.
fast. I never trained them either. I think it's from my running days.
Yeah, there you go. True. I didn't run enough. Not enough running to the fridge. All right. Now, last question. Okay. 3, just everyone. Worst fad in the fitness industry. Worst fad. I'm going to think about it. Jackson, worst fad in the fitness industry.
Current or all time?
All time.
Come back to me.
all right. Top 3? Are we going top 3 or just one?
No, just one. Just one. Everyone just say one.
Oh, it's going to make me seem like such a hater, but I really don't like everything they stand for because it's bigger than just the brands, the fad. It's not that they are a fad, but also they bring in so many other fads within it, and that's F45. They're a fad, and they bring in so many other fads underneath it, detoxes, these low carb keto diets, like all this kind of stuff. It's like they are literally a cult of fad. So I couldn't think of anything that like epitomizes fad more than that. Sounds like my hater, but I think if it gets people off the couch, it's great, and I'm all for it. But I think that it is a fad, and that's because they've done a really good job marketing and stuff. So credit to them. But I also think they bring in a lot of other fads. So it was like fad inception.
Fadception. Bridgette, you're muted. What was your answer? Sorry.
Keto annoys me only because people think it's superior to the calorie deficit.
Yeah.
It's like if you want to go keto, you feel better on keto, that's fine. But I think that ties in with like, carbs are bad, carbs late at night, like that sort of stuff. It's amazing. It amazes me how many people still have these beliefs. It's just, it blows my mind.
I've got a
You wouldn't believe like how common still like bulletproof coffees are in like bars.
Yeah, I was thinking about that.
Like the big special like there's a lot of fads in Bali, like very like vegan, keto, bulletproof coffee everywhere. It's interesting.
Yeah.
I say my answer is when mobility was a really big thing and everyone was just like banging on about like, oh, you're mobilizing this joint, and people's like entire training sessions were becoming, I'm spending 45 minutes mobilizing my ankle and then 10 minutes doing those squats that we were talking about that weren't even fucking effective at training their quads or whatever they're trying to train. And then they're like, I'm an athlete.
Did you guys ever read Supple Leopard by Kelly Starr? Yeah, he was we should all blame him for mobility in the industry.
Can you guys hear my dog snoring? I hope not. Because that's all I've heard. The whole podcast is snoring.
There's definitely been like some reverb or something. Someone's like audio is coming out of their laptop.
Do you know what it sounds like to me? It sounds like Jackson has spies like listening into his computer, and they're talking Indonesian, trying to map out this like elaborate plan to like attack him and like steal his muscles at night or something. That's what it sounds like to me.
Which is what is exactly happening. All right. Well, that's everything.
You didn't ask for mine. Yeah.
I honestly don't care. Go on. Okay. What's your fad? Is it blonde hair? Sorry, that was the least favorite we said. Peroxide blonde. No offense, Bridgette. Oh shit. That's everyone on the call. Go on.
The one that makes me most emotional is the vegan eating for purposes unrelated to ethical reasons, because for whatever reason, that community they will fucking fight you down to the bones. Like they will believe to their dying breath that a vegan diet is superior for performance, for health, for so many things. And it's,
one of my friends brought this up. Like, he's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go vegan. I'm like, oh, okay. Are you doing it for ethical purposes? Because if you are, absolutely go for it. If you're doing it for health and performance sake, then let's hold on a second. Let's review. There's some benefits to eating a predominantly vegan-based diet, but let's not just go throw the baby out with the dishwater or the bath water, however that saying goes. But yeah, great. That's a good one.
Yeah, they just, I feel like it's overtaken keto now. It's like keto is seen as like the top tier dieting approach in like the fad world, but I feel like that's been overcome by the vegan dieting now, and like that's sort of the pinnacle of the popular fad diets now. And people just have so much strong belief that diet method is just elite, and it's kind of crazy because we just do not have the research to support that in any sort of comprehensive fashion.
That's it. Well, on that, I think that concludes a handy bunch of questions. And remember, anyone watching this, ask good questions and make sure that they are within our scope and our expertise for future episodes. Thank you very much for joining us, Bridgette. We really appreciate it. Jackson, Jacob, the pleasure was no doubt all yours. Thank you to everyone for listening and staying tuned. Be sure to submit your questions and keep an eye out for the next episode. Subscribe to the education portal, of course, because there's a whole heap of really useful content that is well within our scope of practice. And yeah, thank you, everyone. Have a great day, great afternoon, and we'll see you on the next one.
See you, folks. Thanks, Bridgette. There you go.
Bye.